Hello, and thank you for registering for the guardianship training. Hennepin County has moved to an electronic format for now, and all of our videos or all of our trainings are on YouTube videos. We may be using another format in the future, so continue to get updates from our informational sessions booklet located at hennepin.us/CMTY support. Guardianship is very individualized. When you consider guardianship and other supported decision-making options or substitute decision-making options, consider person-centered approaches that balance what's important to the person to what's important for the person. Guardianship is not about control, but it's about supporting the person. I've also included another attachment in the email which gives links to any of the links that we've included in the training. So you want to check that out. There's some helpful links about the well-being report and directions how to complete the well-being report, which is required annually if you're a guardian. And also links for additional training resources and information. I'll be discussing the definitions for guardianship and conservatorship. Much of the information presented in this training comes from the Association on Guardianship and Conservatorship called MAGIC. Their website is www.minnesotaguardianship.org. They have helpful resources, trainings, a membership group. Guardianship is the most broadest, most encompassing form of substitute decision-making. It presumes that the person is legally incompetent and not able to make their own decisions. The guardian has all statutory powers and duties given to them through the court. The individual loses the authority to make their own decisions. Just because the individual loses the authority to make their decisions doesn't mean we make these decisions in isolation. Our role as a guardian is to involve the person as much as possible, to know what their wishes might be, to again, direct them in a person-centered manner, to support them versus control. Limited guardianship isn't defined formally in the courts, but it's a limited form of guardianship. The person is not presumed to be legally incompetent in every area. The guardian has limited powers and duties based on the person's needs. For instance, if there's 6 powers under guardianship, the guardian would have maybe less than 6 powers under limited guardianship. The individual may retain some rights, like the right to vote. I'll tell you some stories on a person that I volunteer with. Let's say his name is Dave. Dave had a brain injury because of an accident, and Dave had a negative experience after his hospitalization, going to a residence that was very controlling, that would take his shoes so he couldn't see his parents if he was misbehaving, things like that. And Dave said, I don't want to have anybody decide where I'm going to live. So years later, when Dave has a guardian, he has the power to decide where he's going to live, and the guardian has the other 5 powers. So that's considered limited guardianship. Conservatorship deals with finances. Not everybody needs a conservatorship because not everybody has significant money to manage. It's oversight of the person's finances. It's support when the person has significant funds to manage. Perhaps they have a trust. Perhaps they have an inheritance to consider. Perhaps they're elderly and have property to manage. Those are all maybe reasons to have conservatorship. The conservator makes sure that the management of the funds is done in the person's best interest in mind. They can't just have a checking account and have it earn no interest. They have to invest the money in some kind of financial vehicle that at least earns them some money. Decisions over finance and property and real estate are their focus. The powers of guardianship. These are paraphrased, but when you link to MAGIC website, there's a standards of practice manual that's there, which will give you all of the details listed. And so that's link number 4 in the attached information. First of all, deciding where people are going to live to help them decide their place of abode. It's not enough to just drop them off at a place you've decided they're going to live and say, okay, I'll see you later. The law has very prescriptive detail. It says, is the place a location where people that are friends or family are likely to visit? It even says, is there appropriate light? Is it near a bus line? Is it near the person's support services? Is it accessible to their doctor, to their medical kinds of supports as well? Care, comfort, and maintenance. Care, comfort, and maintenance can be the support services, so making sure that they have access to medical assistance, helping them to apply for services through the county like personal care attendant services, consumer support grant, waivered services, and be knowledgeable about the different programs through the county that will best meet the person's needs and making sure that these services stay open and available for the person. Medical and other professional care. So going to the doctor, the dentist, the chiropractor, the psychologist, the other medical supports. When we talk about the law, the other powers have about 1 page of 10-point type, which explains what that specific power is, and the medical and professional area has about 4 pages of 10-point type. It's not that it's more complicated. They spend more time talking about how to get informed consent from a person and how to offer information so they can make an informed consent. Personal effects, so people's property, if they have property, significant property like a house or their possessions, they don't have to have significant property to be careful about it. If they're moving to a group situation with other people, sometimes the guardian will make an inventory of their personal possessions, how many shirts they have, how many pants they have, so they don't just disappear. They might label them. Other people are less specific when they're providing that support. Contracts. Contracts are interesting because once guardianship is established, you can go back, I believe, up to 60 days and undo that contract. And so if the person entered into a contract to buy magazines, you can send a copy of your guardianship papers to them and say this contract is null and void, and the magazines would quit coming, or any other kind of a contract. They didn't have the authority to enter into if you establish a power over contracts through guardianship. There's another area which is specific. It says to limit the authority only to the point to provide them support. And so it can be tailored to be very specific to meet the person's more individual needs as well. There are different types of guardianship. There's public guardianship through the Commissioner of Human Services. There's private guardianship, which might be a family or a professional. Public guardianship is decreasing. Counties are trying to find relatives or people that are closer to the person than the county administration. Private guardianship is encouraged through a family member or through a paid professional guardian. Whatever the situation, whether it be public or private, the decisions are supposed to be made as close to the person as possible, as if you are the person, making them in the best interest of the person or making them in an arm's length decision, imagining that you are the person and what would that person want in your situation or in the situation you're considering. Again, decisions are made considering what the person wants. Is the decision really yours to make? What are the alternatives that exist? What input do other interested people have? I've been able to meet a lot of people when I've done guardianship training through the years, and there was a couple that attended the training, and they were going to be the guardian for their dad. Their dad was elderly, and he had purchased a car a long time ago, and he had it in a garage, and he was paying monthly rent on the car. The car didn't work, but for some reason he wanted to keep it. He had enough money to pay the monthly rent of the car. That wasn't an issue, but these siblings were frustrated that he was spending money on this car to rent the space for the car that didn't work, and they were going to sell the car and move it on. And that really wasn't their role at all, even though they had the power over personal needs. He wasn't in jeopardy. He had the money to pay for the rent for the garage, and he wanted the car. So it really wasn't their decision to make it all. So when you are considering decisions, make sure that the decision is yours to make. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. How do I determine the needs for support? It's important to involve the person as much as possible when you're talking about which of the powers that you're considering, when you're talking about the guardianship process and what it involves. Think about what the person needs for support and supervision. Based on your knowledge of the person, can they make their own decisions? Can they balance their budget? Can they make medical appointments? Where do they need some help? Think about what's important to them and what's important for them. What's the balance between what's important to them and what's important for them? People might have preferences and things that make them happy that are very different than what you make you happy. And so considering that, think about the people in their lives. What types of people make their day better? What types of people make their day worse? How can you match people that can help and support them to make their day more positive and eventful instead of uneventful? Assessment tools are available from a variety of resources. ARC Minnesota has a resource called Assessing the Need for Guardianship and Conservatorship. If a family group was not sure about which of the powers they wanted to pursue for the person, they could maybe take that assessment, and if they all agreed after completing the assessment, because the assessments were all the same, questions were answered similarly, they'd have some direction. And if they all completed it and they were very different, they might need to dive deeper or consider some input from the courts as well. Psychological assessments, at least one is required to be current. So when you're requesting a psychological assessment, you could have the psychologist concentrate in areas you're concerned about. Maybe it's decision making, maybe it's medical decisions, and so have them explore that to see what support that person might need. If families are in disagreement and several answer the same questions and see where they agree. So see where there's some disagreement, see where you agree, and try to come up with a consensus. Otherwise, the court would intervene and help make decisions. There's several alternatives to guardianship. One of the biggest ones is a new one called supported decision making. There's ABLE accounts that were new January 2017. You can have a representative payee. You can have a power of attorney. You can have supplemental needs trusts, a joint bank account, informal supervision, and advocacy. We're going to talk about each of these individually. Supported decision making is a relatively new option that was introduced. Hennepin County staff were trained on it probably 3 years ago through our county attorneys and through the staff from Volunteers of America and WINGS, which is a court training group. Supported decision making is a recognized alternative to guardianship where people with disabilities use trusted friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face, so they may make their own decisions without the need for a guardian. So a person would maintain their guardianship, but the people who care about them and are involved in their life will continue to be supportive of them and help them to make their decisions by providing information, by talking about pros and cons, and ultimately the person is going to make their own decision, but the people are there to support them. It's an option to support self-determination because the rights of the person are not restricted. They continue to be their own guardian and make their decisions, but the people that care about them continue to support them in their decision making. It supports the person making their own decisions versus taking their rights away. Individuals who need help rely on the team of trusted friends and family and professionals. As I mentioned earlier, WINGS, Minnesota, and there's a link there, which is also on the attached worksheet, provides training for supported decision making and more detailed information. And again, Hennepin County recognizes supported decision making, and staff were trained about 3 years ago in that concept. ABLE accounts were introduced relatively recently in 2017. They stand for Achieving a Better Life Experience. These are accounts that let people with disabilities save for the future without affecting their benefits. The age limit for saving in an ABLE account is 26 years old. The funds are not taxed while they're in the account. When you spend the funds, they can be spent on qualified disability-related benefits. For more information, you can go to Disability Benefits 101, which is www.db101.org, and search ABLE accounts, and that's listed on link number 7. A representative payee. So through the years, I volunteered with many people. We'll talk about Susan. Susan is a person with a disability that lives on her own in an apartment in North Minneapolis. She does not have a guardian, but she has a representative payee. And the representative payee receives her Social Security money monthly and sends checks for rent to the landlord, sends money to her for groceries, and pays the bills, the utility bills, and other bills. So they manage her money so she can have money in a stable manner, so she doesn't spend all of her money. So it's a person or an agency that pays a person's bills. It is voluntary. It's a voluntary option for the person. They don't have to have a representative payee. At any time, they can say, I don't want a representative payee. But the person I volunteered with saw it as a value. They receive the person's Social Security or retirement survival disability insurance. They pay the rent, goods, and utilities. The costs come from the person's income or their Social Security. Some residential agencies offer payee services. So if you're living in a residential support agency or group home, sometimes they offer representative payee services. Power of attorney. Power of attorney is often considered more with elderly folks as they need support with managing their money and their property, but sometimes with people with disabilities that are younger ages as well. The power of attorney can be considered. There's two kinds. One is durable power of attorney, and then a regular power of attorney. It's a written document, often used when someone wants another adult to handle their financial and property matters. It's voluntary, so it can be discontinued on the person's request. The courts generally are not involved in the power of attorney process. When my dad had open heart surgery years ago, we downloaded the document from the website, printed it off. There were 2 nurses in the hospital that signed off as witnesses, and my brother and myself became power of attorney. You want to consider it carefully. There's not as many checks and balances as guardianship. And again, there must be 2 witnesses to sign off on power of attorney. But it helps to support the person, to support their management of resources. You want to be careful and make sure that the people that become your power of attorney are trusted. Supplemental and special needs trusts. Supplemental and special needs trusts provide for the supplement of needs for the person with a disability. So the person might be open to medical assistance, but maybe there's additional kinds of supports and services or just things they want to have that aren't paid through medical assistance. Another person I volunteered with, his parents passed away, and they established a special needs trust for him. And so he could go on trips, he could go out to eat, he could have dinners with his girlfriend, he could do the things that his parents would have done if they were continuing to live, and it was supplemental to medical assistance. So a special needs trust cannot pay for anything that medical assistance would pay for. There's some very prescriptive, detailed rules. It's 2 additional ways to protect funds from medical assistance and purchase things that medical assistance does not purchase. Funds to establish the trust come from the funds being protected, so it's not money in addition to that, it's from the funds being protected. And they make sure the person setting up the trust is knowledgeable or the attorney setting up the trust is knowledgeable of trust because it's always being challenged. One of the trust is payable to the state upon the person's death. The other trust is payable in a will upon the person's death. So you want to check with your attorney to make sure that you have the kind that you're really interested in. A joint bank account. A joint bank account can be another tool to help support a person. It allows for other people to check on the balance, to check on the investments that the person might have in the bank. It also provides some controls. If the person is going to take money out, they need another person's signature. It helps a person to provide an option to oversee the bank account with the owner. When taking money out, both individuals must be involved in the process. So there's some checks and balances. Both individuals have access to the bank records, and so one person can check to make sure that they're not having a solicitor call them on the phone and promising thousands of dollars for something that's not going to happen. Some checks and balances, and it's a less formal way to provide supervision and support for a person that might need help with money or managing money. Informal supervision. We all have friends. If you bought a house for the first time, how many people consulted with somebody who also bought a house? Who did you use? Who was your real estate agent? What was the process? What was your interest rate? You ask those questions, and that's a form of informal supervision. Each of us has relied on friends to help us to make choices and decisions that we have. If you bought a car, you might have taken a friend with you to help you out so you don't end up with a sporty red car when you needed a blue sedan. Informal supervision is common among friends and family, and it's another form of helping to support a person. Advocacy can be very important. Typically, an advocate identifies an issue to advocate on. They come into the situation and they address it, and then they maybe close the case, or they might continue to work with the person if other areas are addressed. They speak on behalf of the individual. Generally, as I mentioned, there's a specific issue that they're addressing. Advocates often need releases of information to be involved. And so if there's an issue with the guardian, an advocate might not be very successful because they might need a release from the guardian to investigate the guardian. And the guardian's going to say, I'm not going to give you a release. You're in my business. So in some situations, the state ombudsman is another form of advocacy, and they can investigate programs and services without a release of information in many cases. So there's ways to look at that differently. Various organizations have advocates as well, including ARC Minnesota, the Mental Health Association, the Autism Society, and others. So it's really important as you consider guardianship to know that there's financial assistance available. There is something called informal papyrus, which is a big word. You can shorten it by just saying IFP. Informal papyrus is financial support for court costs for the person with a disability based on their income. So in most cases, the person with a disability has a limited income, and so their court costs, their attorney's costs, copying fees, background checks, etc., would be paid through informal papyrus. Attorneys are reimbursed reasonable court costs by the county. Again, informal papyrus pays for copying fees, background checks, and other clerical expenses. Recently, there was a change, and the parents may have to pay their own costs if they want their own attorney, so that's something to consider. There's a way to start a process if the person initiates the process by themselves, where you only need one attorney because the person initiated the process by themselves. But in most cases, there's two attorneys, the attorney for the person and the attorney for the potential guardian seeking guardianship. Preparing for the hearing is really important. It takes about 3 months in Hennepin County from start to finish to go through the guardianship process and have the court hearing and become the guardian. The longest process is waiting for the hearing date with the courts. You want to gather evidence to support the needs for supported decision-making, guardianship, or conservatorship. You may want to visit the courtroom with a person ahead of time so they're more comfortable. Sometimes people are cautious, they say, or they think that only bad people go to court. But that's not true. There's all kinds of people that need help and assistance in the court. But they could go to the court, go into an empty room and schedule time with them and maybe sit in the jury box or speak on the microphone, other kinds of things that might make them more comfortable. You want to select a guardianship attorney that acknowledges informal papyrus. So there's different places you can get the list of attorneys that use informal papyrus. ARC Minnesota has a list. Their phone number is 952-920-0855, 952-920-0855. Hennepin County themselves is not supposed to distribute a list because we're not supposed to recommend providers or attorneys. So we often rely on community organizations to do that. You must complete the following things before you attend the hearing. These are really important. There's a court background check, so that must be completed and sent through the court system to make sure that the guardian that's being considered has a clean background check. There's also a form called the acceptance of guardianship. You want to sign that before the hearing or soon after the hearing, and you want to review the court video on guardianship. It's much like the training we're presenting today that kind of goes through the details of the guardianship process. You want to review that, and there's a link here, and in the attached information. And when you're in court, sometimes the referee will say, have you seen the video? Have you seen the guardianship video yet? And if you say, no, I have not, they ask you to leave the room and go downstairs to watch the video and come back. So it's important to make sure that these things are completed in advance, otherwise it's going to delay the process. This looks like a complicated process, but it's really not. It's really a linear process. So the guardianship process, the best time to consider guardianship for a person that's less than 18 is probably 17 and a half years old, because by the time it's done, they will be 18. You don't want to initiate guardianship before age 18 in most cases. The attorney, the second step, will file for the petition. For guardianship, they'll write a letter that says John Doe is petitioning for guardianship. John Doe lives at this address. He's a person with a developmental disability. He needs support and supervision in the following areas. We're recommending the following powers of guardianship. About a month before the court hearing is scheduled, a court visitor will come to meet with the person in their home and explain the process. Often the court visitor is a person that's maybe retired from the county or has experience working with guardianship or is very knowledgeable about guardianship, and they're going to explain to the person with a disability as much as they can using the communication that they use what the process is, what they can expect. You're going to ask them if they're comfortable. They're going to leave information with them, and they're going to file a report, and the report will be filed with the court so the referee at the court can see how the visit went. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's something that's routine that happens with every guardianship. The attorney files a service of notice, and that is sent to the adult siblings and the parents in the immediate family, which is a letter that says guardianship will occur on this date for this person. So if the adult siblings or parents are interested in attending the hearing or contesting the hearing, they can attend the hearing and be present. Guardianship has a lot of checks and balances. The potential guardian completes a background check from the court. We mentioned that earlier. They review the court video. The link is attached to the email that I've sent. They prepare for the hearing with a discussion with the attorney. They talk about what supports and services the person needs, which are the powers they might be considering and why. They attend the hearing, and the hearing is generally brief. In Hennepin County at the 4th District Court, there's a certain time, maybe it's 9 o'clock, and you might think that you're the only person there at 9 o'clock because you got this notice that says be there at 9 o'clock, but there's a whole hallway full of other people that were asked to be there at 9 o'clock as well. So the door opens at 9 o'clock or a little bit after 9. They go in, and the the hearings are not heard in any particular order. Maybe an attorney has a number of people that day and he needs to be heard first. Generally, the hearings that are contested are heard initially, and then they're rescheduled for a future date where they can have more time. But generally, the hearings are brief. They might be 20 minutes or less. The person may or may not be asked to be a witness on their behalf. They may or may not be questioned by the referee, but be prepared for that. Sometimes it's helpful if the attorney can ask the questions and you provide yes or no answers versus the attorney asking the questions, and you have to remember the specific dates and times and names and things like that. So that can help you through the process if the attorney asks questions and provides the information and has you respond yes or no. The court files an order and an entry of order for guardianship or conservatorship. The potential guardian signs the acceptance of guardianship, and generally within a week after court, the new guardian receives a letter with raised letterhead, with raised court seal indicating that they're the guardian. You want to make many copies of this letter and have it with you. Send it to the county, send it to your attorney, make sure family members have copies. But it's really important to have a copy with you, because if you don't have a copy with you, you can't show that you're the guardian. It's important to share it with the hospital, share it with the clinic, share it with your doctor, because they're really looking for information about guardianship and they need that release or the information. Deadlines are really important. The person must appear in court. There's very limited situations where the person wouldn't appear in court, maybe if they're sick or ill, but if they can come, it's really expected that they be there even for a short time. Even if it's a challenge for them to be there, the referee would like to see them. The person with a developmental disability will have their own court-appointed attorney. That's regular, rote, and routine. This attorney will represent them and assess the situation from the person's perspective. The court visitor that we mentioned before will visit the home and provide the person's information about guardianship and the process, and they are considered the eyes of the court. Their information will be shared with the court. A person has many rights. We all have rights. We have the right to legal representation. We have the right to marry. We have the right to vote, unless the court indicates that we can't. We have a right to have our personal desires and opinions considered. When I volunteered with a person years ago, he said, Nancy talked to me today, and Nancy wants to get married. She needs somebody to help carry her groceries. I said, well, John, that's a pretty good reason to get married. But, you know, we need to talk about this. You absolutely have the right to get married, because at the time I was his guardian, and I didn't have anything to say about marriage. He has the right to get married. Although the support services that he had, we had to talk about, because he lived in a group home called an intermediate care facility that had 24 hours, 7 days a week care and assistance. And so his potential wife was living in semi-independent living. She was in an apartment with supports. And so it was a challenge to talk about how they could be married and have a relationship. And so we compromised in many cases. She moved to the same town that he was living in. We made sure that they were together as much as possible. They worked together at the same day program. We took them on trips and vacations and things like that. But we talked about how we can provide for the safety for each person and for their marriage, for them being together. One referee historically has asked if the person has the ability to vote, so you want to be prepared to answer that question if it comes up. It doesn't always come up, but sometimes it does. We have other constitutional rights as well, to dignity and respect. We have the right to privacy. We have the right to have children. We have the right to refuse medical treatment. We have the right to decide what happens to our possessions when we pass away. Think about the right to refuse medical treatment. So if I have a headache, I can say, I don't want an aspirin today. I'm just going to put a hot rag or a cold rag on my head and take a nap for a while, close my eyes, make the room dark, and see if it goes away. But in other situations, if I had very involved diabetes, I know of a person who rode a bus and he went into anaphylactic shock on Tuesday. The bus stopped. They called an ambulance. He was taken to the hospital because he didn't want to take his medication. And then on Thursday, he was riding the bus again, and he went into shock, and the bus stopped, and an ambulance was called, and he was taken to the hospital. And so in some situations, we do have constitutional rights. That's very true, but there's a balance too. So I have a right to refuse my medication up until a certain point, maybe until I start causing harm to myself or other people. So that person eventually ended up being committed to a group home because he was not cooperative with his medication. So it's something we want to keep in mind, that we certainly have rights to do things, but there are also a balance between your rights and your responsibilities. Do not resuscitate orders require great care. They're not fun to talk about, but they need to be talked about at some point because we all get older and we all have emergency situations. And so with one person that I supported, John, we and his guardian at the time talked to him informally about when he got sick, if he wanted intubation, if he wanted CPR. And it's his case, he wasn't a good reader, so we offered pictures of what intubation looked like and what CPR looked like and what we imagine it would feel like. And we got his answers from that. And then we met with his doctor and his nurse, and we had the same regiment of questions. And we explained to the doctor and nurse how we got to the answers. And after that process, we felt better that we had talked with him about his preferences. So something came up in the future, that we'd at least have an indication of how he felt about it. We'd know what to do. And we continue to visit these questions periodically. As time goes by, we just don't forget about them and can continue to talk about them. So we want to have discussions about healthcare directives early, not when the end of life is happening, but early on, so we have an indication of how people feel. Discuss various life-saving procedures with the person, explain what they are. Use graphics if we need to, if the words or the descriptions aren't meeting the need. Ask them at different times to ensure consistency with different people. Some decisions require court approval, even though we are the guardian, we might need court approval. So admitting the person to a regional treatment center. Sterilization in a hospital requires court approval. Psychosurgery or electric shock treatment, experimental treatment of any kind, or revoking a healthcare directive might require court approval. So they might not be in our range of authority as a guardian. Guardian ends when the person's rights are restored, when the person passes away, and if there's a successor guardian or a limited conservator. If there's a successor guardian, limited guardian, or a conservator. Annually, we have to complete a well-being report. If you're a guardian, you have to complete a well-being report. There's a link to directions in the information that I have attached to the email. 1 year from the date, you have to write on the calendar the anniversary date of the well-being report, and you need to return that in within the month of that date, either before or after. There are consequences for not turning it in on time. If the timeline is missed, you will be sent a court date to appear. If you return the report before the court date will be canceled. If you don't return the report and miss the court date, the sheriff will come to your door and provide you with summons and a fine. So there are consequences. I'm not sure why the courts are kind of being a little bit more harsh with this, but that's what they're doing now. So make sure that 1 year from the date that guardianship was established, you complete the well-being report and send it in. I have a couple examples of completing the well-being report. Excuse me, this is what it looks like. The well-being report is completed annually. The county is Hennepin. The judicial district is the 4th judicial district. Look at your paperwork for the court file to get the court file number as well. The document can be found by Googling Personal Well-Being Report, but I've attached a link here as well. This is just the first part of it. As you go through, there's many questions that are asked, and they've changed or modified the report to a 1 through 5 scale with a little narrative describing your rating. The questions are the same every year. You indicate the reason you provided the rating, and the section asks about the current mental and physical conditions of the person. In the report, they call the person the ward. I try and modify by just saying the person. An example would be for questions 3 through 5, rate the wards or the person's current mental, physical, and social conditions by choosing the number of scale 1 through 5 that corresponds. Then give a brief explanation of why you rated the person that way. It continues, rate the person's social condition and how many times you had contact with the person. Was it daily, weekly, monthly? The magic answer is at least monthly. The court wants you to have meaningful visits. And so the contact can be by phone or text or email or in person, but to have meaningful visits. And it's not just visiting the person, it's actually talking with the staff or the support staff or the family member or the care providers as well to get an idea of how that person is. For questions 7 through 10, they address the person's medical, educational, vocational, and other services the last year. You were asked to describe the services, indicate if they were adequate, and explain if you indicated that they weren't adequate. Question 11 asked if you placed any restrictions on the person for communication with or visiting with anyone. Yes or no? This is an important question. The court, we're not supposed to necessarily restrict people's visits or contacts, but there are situations where people might be significantly negative in their life or causing abuse or have a bad history with them that we might need to do that for a while or for a long period of time. We need to explain that, and the court wants to know exactly what happened. Questions 13 through 15. Do you feel guardianship is appropriate? If you are a professional guardian or not, are you getting paid? This form does not require a notary to complete at the very end. You just have to sign and date it. Previous historic forms did require a notary, but they don't require that right now. You'll be asked to, if you serve the notice in person or by mail, there's a form for each, and you may do either. You may serve this document in person or by mail. You must also send a copy of the well-being report to each adult family member of the person and indicate by listing them who it was sent to. If you can't find that person, you want to show the good effort that you did to find the person. What kind of search tool you use to try to find that family member to inform them about the well-being report and the progress a person was making. Some of the forms that you'll need: the well-being report, the annual notice of right to petition, the affidavit of service that we talked about earlier. Personal well-being report is those numbers of questions that's completed every year. If you do a really good job the first year, you can probably modify it the second year. Use a copy that is electronic so you can change the answers as you need to and then reprint it. The annual notice of the right to petition. The person has a right to seek to change their guardianship or modify their guardianship at any time. So you have to tell them by giving them this annual notice of right to petition that they have that right, and within that you give them the phone number of the court and the address of the court, and it explains the process. It doesn't mean that they're going to be able to modify their guardianship, but they have a right to petition. And the affidavit of service, again, is the notice that just says I mailed the personal well-being report or I delivered it in person to the following people. So the annual notice of the right petition, we just talked about that. It's to end or modify the guardianship for any order that's in the best interest or for any appropriate relief. They have that right annually. The notice of the right to petition, you provide an affidavit of service that just says I served them in person or I served them by mail. I gave a copy to them in person or by mail. That's required. For more information, feel free to email me directly, jerry.mellum@henbin.us. My phone number is listed. Email is probably the easiest way to reach me. And I look forward to answering any of your questions. And if you have any suggestions or questions, please let me know. Thanks so much.